of work that is not here, that is not in Rocky Neck. And so it's really nice to be doing things within my own community. So I'm delighted, truly delighted to be doing this. And I get enormous joy out of the children's books that I write. And so for me, doing a workshop like this is an enormous pleasure. So thank you for being here. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to share a PowerPoint about an overview of how to write, illustrate, and publish children's books, which, as you've heard, I've done a lot of, and I've done it in a variety of different ways. And then what I'd like to do is read to you, and I'll give you a choice as to what you want to hear in terms of from my first book or my most recent book, or one of my children's poetry books, which has also been published. And then we'll open it up for question and answers. And here's the difference between this and the course. In the course, we go into more detail of what is entailed at each of the phases, which you'll see tonight. But also in the course, we get to know each other and share your ideas for your writing, and illustrating and publishing, and answer, in a more intimate fashion, the kinds of questions you have. So I hope some of you will think about joining us there. I should add that all of my children's books are trauma sensitive. My area of expertise as an educator is trauma and its impact on learning and psychosocial development. So all of my children's books are trauma sensitive, which is not something we need to go into here tonight, but I just wanted to share that with you. But before we turn to the PowerPoint, I thought almost as a way of humor and interest, I thought I would share with you the two questions I'm asked most as a children's book author. The first is a sort of sarcastic, nasty question like, why would a former college president write children's books? As if what I'm doing is somehow not important and not sufficiently worthy. And I have to say that one of the things I learned as a college president, and then I worked for the US Department of Education in the Obama administration, is that if you really want to improve the outcomes of the life of children, you have to push back the educational train right to the beginning. And so what better way to do that than to write and illustrate and publish children's books? So it's actually very consistent with what I believe in education, and certainly one might say as, if not more important than what I did in many of my other roles. And then the second question that I'm asked is I write a series, which is about Lady Lucy. And she's a little girl, multiracial, who grows older as the series grows. And one of the questions I'm often asked is, are you Lady Lucy? And I leave that question open as we discuss what I do. So with that, and that's Wrinkles, who will hopefully quiet down. I think we all have a children's book in us. I think we have memories of being read to by someone. Many of us have memories of reading to someone, one's own child, one's grandchildren, children in a classroom. I think many of us have had remarkable experiences in our lives, and real life and fictitious stories to tell. And I recently was thinking about Justice Sotomayor's recent book, which she has written several children's books about the neighborhood in which she grew up in and her life as a child. And it reminded me that while celebrities do this, the rest of us can too. And so whether the events one wants to share are fun ones or harder ones, I think we all have those creative insights. And sort of one way to get at that is to just ask you to think about the favorite children's book that you were read to, or that you read to or with children. And so just take a minute and see if you can identify what that book might be in your own life. The one you were read to by whoever did their reading with you, and one you may have read to children or grandchildren or as an educator, or in whatever capacity you've done that. And so I'll give you a second to come up with it and just write it down. The reason I do this exercise is because I think we're inspired by the books that have moved us, the children's books that have moved us. And many of us have kept the children's books that we read to our own children or that were read to us. I've even gone out and gotten copies again of books that really mattered to me as a child and that I read to my own son. And actually the Lady Lucy series was inspired by many things, but one of them is a book called The Knight Who Was Afraid of the Night. And so I think that we're often inspired in that way. So I would just encourage you to think about that. So I break the process of writing, publishing, illustrating a children's book into 6 pieces. And I want to just share the 6 pieces and which ones we're going to focus on tonight, although in the course we focus on others beyond the top 3. So there's obviously the writing of the story. And then after the writing of the story, there's the illustration piece of it. And then there's a designing piece, which is the way you integrate the text with the illustrations, which is a really important and often underrated phase of all of this. And then there's the publishing, and there are a variety of options and opportunities and challenges in the context of publishing. But even once a book is published, there's a whole set of questions around promotion of a book and how a book gets known and how a book gets sold. And while one may not care about that and may just want the book for one's own family or one's own community, if you want your books to be widely read and placed in libraries and used in classrooms, then promotion becomes a big piece of this as well. And lastly, there's what I'd call prizes and recognition. There are lots of ways that children's books get recognized, lists of good books for children to read, trauma-sensitive children's book lists. There are a variety of prizes that are given, both prestigious ones and then ones that are really nice, but not as prestigious. So what we're focusing on here tonight is the writing, illustrating, and publishing of children's books. And then hopefully we'll get enough of an understanding that this is helpful to you as you set about to write, illustrate, and or publish a children's book. Now, there's no one way to do all this. So there are 6 phases, just to go back, and the skill sets needed for all of them are not necessarily the same. So somebody may be very good at writing, not so good at illustrating, or designing for that matter. And some people like to promote, some people don't. Some people care about prizes and recognition. But the reason I raise this is you have to ask yourself, where do my strengths rest? Which of these 6 phases are the ones I'm willing to do, able to do, want to do? And if I can't do the others, am I willing to pay for them to be done by other people? And if they're going to be done by other people, who are those other people? And then issues like costs come into play in terms of thinking about who will and how much do you have to pay to get those other skills done. So with that in mind, and I should say that I've done it in a variety of ways, which I'll share with you. But I think these are questions one has to ask of oneself before one starts, so that you know both what you can do and what you may have to pay for. Or if you don't want to pay, how can you partner with someone who can engage with you, whether it's a charity or whether it's a school or whether it's a college. I mean, there are lots of ways that one can do this to improve the likelihood of success and to keep it within a reasonable cost time frame. So let's start with the writing piece of this. And I don't know amongst all of you how many of you are into the writing phase. I can't see some of you because your face isn't there. And I would ask you just, how many of you are interested in the actual writing phase? If you just want to put a thumbs up or a something to see which part is most of interest to you. And how many of you are interested in the illustrating phase of it? So I can see that. And how many of you are interested in all the phases? Writing, publishing, illustrating, promoting, designing, and the like. So we have enough people who are interested in all the pieces, I think, to focus a little bit on each of them. So let's talk about the writing piece. So I think there are lots of initial questions in terms of the writing. And let's start with, who are you writing for? And children's books are really clearly divided between different age groups for which they're intended. I mean, there are books, and by the way, I've written for all different age groups. There are books written for younger children, meaning sort of the infant to 2 or 3 phase. And actually, I've done those on indestructible paper. Those are sort of the equivalent of what in our youth, many of us, used to be cloth books and things like that. Then there's writing for young readers. Those are books that actually can be read by young kids. And then there are picture books that can be read with and to and by children. And lastly, there are books that are for older kids, generally not picture books, although some of my books use illustrations even for older kids, but that are put into chapters and follow an audience that's somewhat older. Now, my poetry, just so you know, cuts across all ages. It's been read by everybody from kindergartners all the way through high school. So there are some books that work for all ages and stages. Then there are different kinds of stories, obviously, whether one is writing fiction or nonfiction, whether one is writing a series or a one-off book, and to think about whether the books you write are going to link together somehow, either artistically or in terms of storyline. And then into what languages do you write? I write in, my children's books are in English, and some of them are bilingual, and some of them are also in Spanish. And I say that because depending on who you're writing for, who your audience is, you may want to think about language. And then you want to think about anticipatorily as you write, are you going to have an illustrator who uses pictures as in, say, things you can buy on the internet, or are they going to actually illustrate it in one form or another, or are you going to use photographs? I mean, so that as you're writing, you can sort of picture what a book will look like. So I made this drawing here, which is, well, it could be improved. What can I tell you? It's not as bad as it could be. and hopefully I'll share it with you. It's what I call the layer cake approach to writing a children's story. So if you just follow the main numbers here on the left side first, the bottom layer of the cake is the story, the actual story. But then if you look at number 2, there's usually a theme or a message or something that you're trying to get across in addition to the story. It may be about kindness or collaboration or getting over scary things or how to deal with dilemmas. But there's usually some themes embedded in the storyline. And then if you move to the right side at the bottom and look at history, so almost all of my children's books are grounded in, even ones that look like fiction, grounded in something historical, either a time period like Lady Lucy is in medieval times, but many people write sort of takeoffs of actual people and their lives or periods of history. And so the idea of knowing that history, thinking of that history, really matters. And so lots of what I do, in addition to the storyline and themes, is do research on history so that I can think about that in the context of books. And then speaking of that, if you move up the chain there is context, which is understanding sort of when a particular story fits into the larger world in which we're operating. So for example, my most recent children's book has a pandemic theme, very subtle, but it's there. And I say that because my other books also have a context. So one of the books tied into a historical event that occurred at about the same time. So context matters. It may not matter for certain books, but it may matter for others. And then I think all of our children's books have values that undergird them, things that we're trying to communicate and say. In addition to telling a story, in addition to the themes, I think there are values. And lastly, I would suggest that, at least for me, making a book trauma sensitive or trauma responsive is an important piece. So there's lots of layers in the writing part of a children's book. And I just want to encourage you as you write to think about it in terms of a layer cake. So that only gets us as far as writing. And by the way, there's lots that we'll talk about in the course in terms of word choice and how you know and can actually use the internet to calculate the reading level of the books that you've written, where you can take whole paragraphs and plug them into a particular translator, not to translate them, but to actually determine the grade level at which what you're writing is showing up. And by the way, adult books can be tested for the same thing, because some adult books can only be read by people, you know, who are scholars, and others can be read by a more general population. So in terms of moving now to phase 2, which is illustrating and illustrations, I think you have to ask yourself, can you do it yourself, or do you get or hire a professional illustrator? And you can also, by the way, there's plenty available on the internet for free or for a low fee that one can use if one has a good eye for that. I have done several kinds of joint ventures. So I did my first children's book in the Lady Lucy series was actually illustrated by 2 high school students who did it as their senior project. And then they continued to illustrate for a couple more of the books while they were in college. And it was partly a way that I could help them pay for their education. It also was a really wonderful experience for both of them to write and illustrate and have their names on books. So that was one way I've done it. I have also used my own collection of giraffes to illustrate one of the children's books, which was about giraffe. And so that book is photographs. Now, I did have them professionally photographed by a photographer that I know at a rate that was reasonable, but the photographs are amazing. So I've done it that way. But I have also had a illustrator who's worked in partnership with me. And she's based in England. And she, with her students, does a lot of the illustrations of the more recent Lady Lucy books. And her illustrations are absolutely amazing. But she does have kids engaged in the process as well. So I think that's another important piece of this. So I've done it different ways. And also I should add, I have illustrated one of my children's books. I would say, I'm not sure I would do that again, but I have. The other is to ask if you could do it with a friend or a partner or a stranger. Who are you comfortable having take your words and give them visual voice, so to speak. And some people ask the question, should you write the story first and then get an illustrator? Or some illustrators ask the question, can I give some illustrations to a writer and have the writer write a book around the illustrations? And I think I can go either way. I have done it with the writing first and the illustrations later. But I certainly think that if you're an illustrator, you can put together a package of linked illustrations and then go to a writer and see if he or she can weave a story. And I'm reminded in that context of Charlie Mackessy's book, The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse, where the illustrations could well have been done separate from the book. They could be standalone illustrations, frankly, and then the text added. So I just suggest that you keep that kind of question in mind. Now, finding the right pairing between a writer and an illustrator is not easy, in part because each of the people has a voice and each of the people has a vision for what something could look like. And so you really need to be on the same page. So the illustrator may have one thought about how a story should look, and the author of the story may have another totally different vision. I've been really fortunate in that regard, that with the students I've worked with, I've been able to articulate really what I thought the story meant, but they were able to take that story and do amazing things with it. And in fact, now when I look at the books that the students did, the two students, I can't even tell which student did which illustration. That's how sort of in sync we were and how amazing it felt to have them. So I thought I would just share with you how some of this worked from my own books. The Lady Lucy's Quest initial book, which was translated into Spanish, this cover, La Saga de la Señorita Sofía, that's an illustration done by high school students. And they did her, they did Lady Lucy there, and she's also, they did this illustration, which is an illustration which is a little hard to see here, but of Lady Lucy and her friends in the forest. Now, Are You a Giraffe, which is a prequel, has the Lady Lucy figures, no wrinkles, from the original story. And then it uses actually sort of clip art versions of Giraffe throughout the book. So that book actually combines clip art together with the illustrations from the first book. Flying umbrellas and red boats, I illustrated throughout. That's the poetry book. This is a book which was done in an interesting way. It was sponsored by an organization. So they came to me and asked if I would write a book for them, which I did in English and Spanish. And we illustrated the book by sort of fancy Canva kind of art. But that whole book was actually written and paid for by an entity that wanted it for those that they serve. So thousands and thousands of copies of that book were made. This book is the one of the photographs of the giraffe collection, Lady Lucy's Laugh Giraffe, and they're augmented by some of the illustrations from the original book. And my newest book here, Lady Lucy's Morgan Horse Quest, was illustrated by my current illustrator, Diane Sunda, who lives in England. And her illustrations are absolutely breathtaking. The Lady Lucy's Morgan Horse book, if you like horses, are wonderful. She also illustrated Lady Lucy's Dinosaur Quest and Lady Lucy's Ghost Quest, and there's a sample of her. This is a cover to one, this is a cover to the other. So once you have the story and the illustrations, then you have to design how it all goes together, which is a phase we're skipping here tonight, but will be explored in the course. And my designer has been the same for all of my books. Other than my adult books, I have used the same designer. And I say that because the books, even though they're differently illustrated, have something of a similar feel. And after the years of working together, she knows me and I know her, so that works well. And now let's turn to publishing. So there are lots of ways to think about publishing books, and none of these are particularly easy. And I just want to say that I think in prior decades, we used to make a value judgment as to which is the, quote, better way of publishing. But I think in today's world, that's vastly less of an issue. So the sort of historic route that people have taken is to identify an agent, and you present that agent with a proposal, a very detailed proposal, which is something I have done with my adult books. And then the agent goes out and seeks a publisher. Now you can try to go directly from your proposal, write a proposal to a publisher. It is very hard unless you're extremely well known. I did try that without an agent. I also tried it with a public relations team that I used. And none of those routes worked for me for my children's books. Now, my adult books I have done by going directly to a publisher with a proposal, and they've been published in a totally different way, but it did not work effectively for children's books. Now, another way is to seek what's known as nowadays an independent publisher who has a distribution arm. And these are small publishers. They vary in quality and outreach and editing. This is not the same as self-publishing. Independent publishers do not publish everything that's given to them. And they often provide some of the services that you can't do on your own, like designing or editing or proofreading. But the best of them have access to outlets for the book, whether that's that they're affiliated with a bookstore, they are tied to a bookstore so they can share the books and do book showings and book readings within their own facilities. They're linked in to Ingram, which is the independent publishing arm. So that's another route. I have done that with enormous success. And I have used a press, which I don't think is taking any new books now, called Shire's Press, that was connected to the North Shire bookstore, which at the time was one of the largest independent family-owned bookstores in America. They had 2 stores. They were really well known. So North Shire not only sold my books, they did publishing events for me, and Shire's Press, which was affiliated with them, actually published the books. Now, there's co-publishing, which I have also done. I've used a British publisher because my illustrator is abroad, called Fat Cat. And now I'm using a different British publisher. So I've co-published, where the publishing company is a US-based Shire's Press. And then I've used Fat Cat in England or another entity in England. And that's because my illustrator has been able to help me identify British publishers. And that means that the books that are sold in the UK come out of the British side of it, and the ones in the US come out of the US side of it, which makes transportation of the books vastly easier. Another way to publish, which I had mentioned before, is you identify a sponsor who in essence becomes the publisher. That's an organization that wants a book that they can use within their organization or school system. I mean, there are lots of companies that actually care about publishing something, especially if they're in the healthcare field or the education field. And so they can sponsor the writing of a book. And the last one is that you can self-publish totally through Amazon or other platforms. If you self-publish through Amazon, they will sell your book. But by the way, they use themselves as their distributing agent. But there are other ways to self-publish. And you can still get yourself on Amazon, and you can get into Barnes and Nobles and sell to the public directly. And the stigma of self-publishing is going down. There is a huge upfront cost to it. Well, not huge. There's a sizable upfront cost. And depending on how long the book is and the type of paper you want and the nature of the illustrations, this can be a way to do it, but it isn't always totally cost-free. And you have to think about whether you're willing to absorb the cost of not only having books published that you don't get all the money back, but that you have to go about finding outlets for distributing the books. So in the next slide, I show you what I have done. So there's Shire's Press that I have used. In the next one here, you can see the co-sponsorship, the co-publishing between Shire's Press and Fat Cat, which is UK based, and Shire's Press, which is US based. And this is one of the books that was actually a sponsored book. It was paid for by LA Care, which is the largest nonprofit public insurer in California and has 2 million clients, many of whom are children. So they wanted books for the children they served in the healthcare arena. So we also developed not only the story, but a workbook, a healthcare-like workbook that went along with it. And this book, which is the Lady Lucy Laugh Giraffe Journey, actually is co-branded with the Giraffe Conservation Foundation, and a portion of the proceeds of this book go to help support this organization, which works to ensure that giraffes do not become extinct. And while they didn't pay for the publishing, that kind of co-sponsorship has made that book really successful, because a portion of those proceeds go to them, but also they've talked about the book. I use their name when I promote the book. And so that's another route to take. So I thought it might be useful to share a little bit and read a little bit from one of my books, and then we'll do questions. But I do want you to have this, if you want to take a picture of it, which is how to find me. And you are welcome to reach out to me. You are welcome to email me. You can call me. You can get to me on Facebook or through Amazon or through LinkedIn. I also have a website, so you can, there's a contact form in there. You can do that as well. So I think I'm going to stop sharing. And you get a copy of this PowerPoint, by the way, if that's helpful to you. And what I'd like to get a sense of is whether you want me to read from one of my children's books, either the First Lady Lucy book, or if you want me to read one of the poems. There's a really good poem on rain. And given that that's what's happening. So you share with me, we'll kind of do a vote thing as to which one. I won't read the whole of anything, but just to give you a sense. So let's just get a raise of hands. How many want to hear at least the beginning of the original Lady Lucy book? Do we have any votes for that? Okay, how many want to hear from the more recent book, which is the most, which just came out actually in December, called Lady Lucy's Morgan Horse Quest, which is for slightly older kids? Or do you want to hear the poem on rain? Can we see a show of hands, like, or maybe just like somehow indicate what's your preference or what you'd like, or unmute yourselves and shout out what you want?
People can unmute at this point. There seems to be a little of everything in there, Karen. The Lady Lucy, please, and the Wrinkles book.
Okay, so the Wrinkles book you can get on your own. The Wrinkles book is available on YouTube, and if you look up Wrinkles doesn't like social distancing, you can find that really easily. There's a version to music, and there's a version not to music. There's a version in Spanish. Arrugas is the Spanish word for wrinkles. I'm not sure it quite has the same humor. So why don't I read you a little bit from the Lady Lucy book. Lady Lucy is a multiracial heroine. She's actually based on a real woman, Lady Lucy Duff Gordon. And as I can share in much greater length later, the real Lady Lucy was not recognized for all of her enormous strengths. She was a fashion designer, and no one gave her credit really for all that she accomplished. And she inspired this book. I used to run a Lady Lucy Day when I taught, in which I talked about Lady Lucy Duff Gordon, who also thrived by surviving the sinking of the Titanic. And usually when I read the Lady Lucy books, I dress up in costume. I dress up like Lady Lucy, or I dress up like one of her characters. So tonight you just see me as I am without dressing up. All my Lady Lucy books are dedicated to future Lucys. And here's a feature of all of them, which is an interesting sort of artistic idea. So the word Lucy in all of these books is in a different font in every single one of the Lady Lucy books. And that's so that kids who are younger, who can't read, but are reading along with me or with their family, can always figure out when to say Lucy. And so they can read along even when they're not able to read. And so kids have done it. So kids shout out the name Lucy, they whisper the name Lucy, they do all sorts of amazing things. It's really interactive. So as I read a page, just so you can see, while you're not reading it with me, you can see that kids actually read along. So here's the first illustration of the book, and they're all dedicated the same to the future Lucys. And I have a strategy on this, which is that if I'm ever in a place that has a kid named Lucy, I always carry one of these books with me, she gets a book for free. And I've actually, in communities that know me, have had people come up to me in restaurants and say, there's a little girl over at that table over there, and her name is Lucy, and I go retrieve the book and I give it to her. And for me, this has been one of the most remarkable, fun things that I do. So there are lots of Lucys running around with this book. And it's a really nice thing for me. Long, long ago, in the time of kings and queens and castles, there was a spirited young girl named Lucy. More than anything else in the world, Lucy wanted to be a knight. In her dreams, she slew dangerous dragons. She fought fierce battles. She saved starving lions. You cannot be a knight, her mother and father told her tartly. Girls cannot be knights. It's in the kingdom's book of rules. Her little brother, Neville the Devil, pulled at Lucy's hair and teased. Anyway, you could not pass the terrible tests of knighthood. But Lucy was determined. She went directly to Sir Winston, the oldest and wisest knight in the kingdom, who kept the book of rules in his castle. Please, Sir Winston, she said, show me where in the book of rules it says a girl cannot be a knight. And by the way, this is a collage. This is the illustration. It's a collage. And actually the words are from a real book, and it's words about anti-discrimination. So so there's a layer of meaning tucked into it.
Right on.
Sir Winston started searching the big book, but hard as he hunted, he could not find one rule saying girls could not be knights. He mumbled to himself, there must be a rule in this big book somewhere. He called for the other knights of the kingdom to come to his castle. They too searched the book of rules. Hours tick-tocked on. They could not find a rule either. Since you cannot find a rule preventing girls from becoming knights, Lucy observed as dusk approached, I should at least be allowed to take the tests of knighthood. Sir Winston, focusing his gaze on Lucy, shrugged his shoulders and said, the 3 tests of knighthood are hard to pass. You need endurance, strength, and courage. At least let me try, she replied rapidly, staring straight back at him. Sir Winston glanced at the other knights. Let her try, he whispered and winked. She'll never pass all 3 tests. So why don't we stop there? And why don't we open it up for questions? I know some of you have your hands up. I think we have 10 or so minutes. And so I'd welcome your questions. I hope this was useful for all of you. I hope it gave you a sense of what I do, but also the opportunities for all of you to do amazing things with the stories you have to tell, whether through illustration or through words or design. And certainly you can't pick a time now when such things are truly needed by children. We live in a really crazy world, and so your stories will really help them. So I hope to see some of you in the course, and now let's take your questions. And I think I'll let Janice call on people. That might be the easiest.
I've asked everyone to unmute. So if you have a question, you can just speak up at this point.
I have a question.
Sure.
What age was this story written for, and how many words, how many pages is
The
this
original
book?
Lady Lucy story. The original Lady Lucy story was written for ages 5 to 8,
Okay,
ages 5 to 8. And the number of pages, there's a standard in the industry, although this doesn't fit it exactly. I'd have
Yeah.
to count the number of pages here. It has been used. It's a read to, read with, read by book. So it fits all of those. It's a book that I've actually had kids read with me who are first, second grade. So that's really the age level. I'm happy to count the number of pages.
you don't really have to, but I'm writing a nonfiction book,
Okay.
and it has death in it. It's about my mom actually died, and what happens is, this is a true story. There's a robin that comes every year in the spring and sits on and pecks at my window and sits on the tree outside my window, my bedroom window. Every spring it comes. And I
Oh,
believe that's my mom.
okay. That's a
And I wanted,
wonderful story.
when I moved into this house, that's what happened. I moved in the day of my mom's celebration of life.
Oh,
So I want to change it to a little girl and her mom moving into their castle, their new castle. And this bird comes, and it's her Nana that died. But it's so hard to put death into a children's book.
right. Although there are many children's books that deal with it really well. And unfortunately, in today's world, more and more kids have to deal with death.
With COVID, they're losing their
Yes.
parents.
Well, I mean, the total number of kids, I mean, I only know this number because this is what I do for a living. But the number of kids who've lost their primary parent is about 150,000. And if you add in their secondary caregivers, grandparents and the like, it's 500,000 children have lost
It's
either
sick.
their primary or secondary caregiver. So that's a really significant number. So by the way, it's 34 pages.
Okay.
But not all the pages have writing. So
No, I know,
just
I know.
Lucy. And there is a Lucy doll. She's now been sold out. But
Wow.
it was a Lady Lucy doll. She was beautiful. I wish I'd kept one for myself. But ultimately, I sold them all.
Yeah.
And there have been Lady Lucy ornaments. I mean, there's been a lot of added pieces to Lady Lucy.
Just God bless you. What a great story. Thank you.
Absolutely. Wonderful story.
So does anyone else want to ask anything or share anything or chime in, or are there questions in the?
There was a question earlier, Karen, in chat from Linda Bork about needing help, direction, sources on illustrations. Linda, do you want to clarify that question a little bit more, or?
Well, yes, I just,
Oh, sorry.
I've done some writing, and then I think, well, I'm not an illustrator, so how do I find an illustrator? And then I looked to see who to send it off to, and some seem reputable, some don't. Some are famous names, some aren't. And so I just wondered if there's a good place to look for viable lists or of illustrators, publishers. Where did you find your English illustrator? And how did you find your agent? And how did you choose which publisher?
Okay, these are all really hard questions, right?
Okay.
I mean, there's no simple answer. I don't know of a list of illustrators. One way you can look at illustrators is to go look at a children's book section in a bookstore and just sit down and look at the books that you like and look at who illustrated them and reach out to those illustrators that you like. I actually have used students at schools that I know and have known. I mean, part of that's helped by the fact that I'm an educator, but there are gifted young people. So I probably, if I really didn't have ties, I would go to an art school and use that. There are many art students who can certainly use the money. They don't charge nearly what a amazing illustrator does. And yes, someone online is saying there, I know Chloe. Hi, Chloe, how are you? Chloe is an amazing illustrator. And
Can I use her?
I've seen Chloe's work. And Chloe, who's online here, is really remarkable. So there are also organizations of children's book writers and the like, more formal organizations. I was hoping actually that there could be some way with the Writing Center and Rocky Neck Art Colony that people maybe could find each other, sort of like a matchmaking thing. So that had always been like in the back of my mind as something that maybe could happen as a result of this or the course. And in the course, as people like share more about their book and we talk about their themes, or illustrators share some of their illustrations, or I share some of mine, maybe people will find matches. Just a
Linda,
thought.
we could set up a lightweight version of that. This is Janice. I do have a name. It's not Rocky Neck Art Colony.
Okay.
If you,
Thank you, Janice.
I'll put my, oh, actually it is. Yes, you're right. I'll put my Rocky Neck email in the chat as well. And if somebody is an illustrator or looking for an illustrator, is a writer looking for a writer, I'll see what we can do about matchmaking.
Great.
Not promising quick results, but I'll be able to do something for you.
I would just say, without being too controversial here, that you should, I think it's a good idea to hook up with somebody if your aim is to self-publish. If you're interested in publishing with an established publisher, sending your manuscript in with illustrations is probably the death to your proposal, because bona fide established publishers have their own favorite illustrators, and they have designers and editors whose job it is to match up the story with the illustrator. And if they get a submission that has illustrations attached to it, even if they love the story but don't like the illustrations, the answer will be no, and vice versa. They just don't want to get involved with, splitting up a team or whatever. So if you've already decided to self-publish, then I think hooking up with an illustrator is a great way to go. But I would say if you're just wanting to sell a story, just send it out without illustrations and trust that the person you're sending it to has the ability to see the illustrations.
So I agree with you if you're just sending a story through an agent. And the proposals that I have sent did not have illustrations in them. I think you're absolutely right. I wish I knew is it Linda?
Yep.
But one of the downsides of that which I've seen in my adult books, is that you give up a lot in terms of the quality and the feel of the illustrations that you get. So I actually have negotiated with my adult publishers the illustrations within the book so that I see them in my adult books, but I've had trouble with the cover. And I've had controversies because they want their people to design the cover. And I haven't always loved the covers. And they've been pretty clear that that's their right to make the cover. And it's certainly in my contract that they make the cover. And I always have sort of heart failure when I see some of the covers.
No, you're so right. Every book that I've done that I did not design the cover, my name would have been bigger if I had done it. So,
Actually, I don't care about my name. I care that it message right. And I actually, there was one cover, I have to say, I said to the public, I can't do it. I can't do it. You're just gonna have to, like, I don't know. I violates my contract. I can't do it. I cannot have this cover. I mean, this cover isn't me. And so a book with that cover, just like is making me sick to my stomach. And I made a lot of, I worked hard to write this book. So ultimately it got improved. Not perfect, improved.
I have another question. What do you mean by writing a proposal?
So,
Are you actually like telling them what the story's about?
oh no, you're doing way more than that.
Okay.
You're literally you're practically writing the book. They want to know that you've thought through the book, that you know what's in each chapter, that you know all the parts of that layer cake, but you also have to write about yourself. And in today's world, you have to write about your social media platform and how many followers you have on LinkedIn and how many followers do you have on Instagram and Facebook and the like.
Ah,
So
really?
that, oh yeah, I mean, and then you have to talk about what you've written in the past and reviews that you've had of your work in the past. And actually, one of the things that I did before my second adult book, for which I had to write an extensive proposal, one of the things I did is I worked on my social media platform, which really I had never thought about, started, dealt with. And I was told, if you really want to get this book published, you need to show them that you have a substantial social media following.
Wow. Okay.
One more question.
Good
How
to know.
long would you say it takes to do one, how long to take one book? Did it take you from beginning to end? A year, 3 years, 6 months, 6
Depends
weeks?
what you mean to do.
Well, average from pen to paper to seeing your name in print.
So I write fast. So that's kind of a different question for different people. I mean, some people it takes them years and years to write. Some people it takes them weeks. I'm writing a new children's book, a new Lady Lucy book right now, a sequel, another sequel. And I would say, and I haven't started it yet, I'm doing the research that undergirds the story. And I would say it will take me, I'll write the story in probably 2 months.
Wow.
And then my illustrator, I'll give them the story before it's done. So she can start reflecting on illustrations. And then I'll finish writing and editing. And then I'll have a couple people read it who always read my things and make suggestions. So I would say from start to ultimate publication, it's probably 18 months. I mean, this book the new one I'm writing will be out. I think this book just came out December 15th of 2021. The next one will come out for the holiday season next year.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well,
I learned a lot.
I hope this was helpful. I hope I'll see
Yeah.
some of you again. I
Fabulous.
welcome your questions.
Bravo, thank you.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
My
Great.
pleasure.
This will
Absolutely
be-
learned.
Posted on YouTube and in a day or two. It'll take me a while to get it up. And also I put the link in the chat to the workshop that starts next week. And the chat will all be in the YouTube video as well for you.
And reach out to me. The contact information is in that PowerPoint on the very last page. So I'd welcome hearing from you if I can be helpful.
Great.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank
Thank
My
you so
pleasure.
much.
Thank
This
Thank
was
you,
wonderful.
everybody.
Special thank you to the Rocky Neck Art Colony.
Yeah, they rock.
Thank you, Karen. Yes, we rock.
Thanks,
You
Janet.
do. Absolutely. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
night.
See you
Have a good
soon.
night. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.